Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. It's another episode of Iron Radio. This is Phil Stevens. I'm a strength coach, powerlifter, Highland Games athlete, and youth sport coach. Good morning.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet Cert and the Phys Flex Cert, associate professor at the Kerrigan Institute, and home for a couple more days, and then headed to Texas.
You guys just got a bunch of snow up there this week, didn't you?
Yeah, about a week ago we did.
Yeah, like 10 inches. I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, and probably not even quite a week ago. It was weird. It was super warm. It was like in the 40s and 50s for a while, which is insane. All the ice went off the lakes, and then it snowed. We're like, what the hell?
Coach Durrell out of Strength Guild in Kansas City, a gym owner, strength and conditioning coach for all ages, and a competitive weightlifting coach.
Right on. This is Lonnie Lowry. I am a professor of about 25 years, food industry and academic consultant, former competitive bodybuilder. All right. So we have different kinds of news. Phil, let's start with that, what you were talking about there earlier.
I was just looking at this, and there's a new study. Basically, I try and look at the news, anything new coming up. And there's a study that came out, and apparently it's hitting all the major news channels, of course. And basically it's a backlash against intermittent fasting because they're saying it has become all the rage for weight management and bodybuilders and strength athletes. And this one was like, should we put the brakes on it? Dr. Victor Wenzi Zhang did a study, 8-year study, and it was based off longitudinal observational data of 2,078 adults, and it's collected information of dietary patterns from 2003 to 2018 against data on the U.S. deaths from 2003 to 2019. The primary findings include those who adhered to a time-restricted eating, consuming all their calories within an 8-hour window, had a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular disease. The similar increase exists for people living with heart disease or certain cancers. For people living with cardiovascular disease, a feeding window of 10 hours per day was associated with a 66% increase of risk of death. Time-restricted feeding did not reduce overall death risk, and a feeding window at or above 16 hours per day was associated with lower cancer mortality rate for cancer patients. That's the gist of it, and that's the bullet points they put out there. And then this, of course, article goes on to like, well, what are the holes in this study? And part of that was the self-reporting and things like that. And, of course, like, okay, well, what are these people eating in their 8 hours? If you're eating Ho-Hos and cookies, it's a big difference. So, but, yeah, I mean, it's just saying that, what they found was drastic increases in health risk when you cut your eating time down.
It suggests to me again, it's just observational, it's not causal, right? But it suggests that there might be a threshold effect. Like if you pound calories in all your food in a narrow window, higher insulin, higher blood sugar and stuff during that time as opposed to spreading it out. Because, I remember back, 20 years ago, there were some researchers that were talking about doing quite the opposite. Like if you can spread a meal out as much as possible, you kind of stay below certain thresholds and more like blood sugar, insulin, trying to keep the response down. So that might be some
and
explanation.
As far as the bodybuilders go, intermittent fasting is way different than the word on the street was for bodybuilders back in the day. It was like small meals as often as possible. Right. There was like no window of not eating. It was,
get up in the middle of the night,
4 times a night. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Like, I remember answering questions about that 15 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
should I wake up twice a night and pound protein so I don't go
Absolutely.
catabolic? And like,
Yeah.
no, dude, no, sleep. You
Yeah.
know?
No, I think
Oh.
your human body's meant to fast some, and I know Mike probably has some thoughts on this whole intermittent fasting thing, but um, in a way, it's sort of like an area under the curve comparison. Like, is your insulin and blood sugar, if you spike it, narrow window, is all that area under that curve, if you imagine a line graph, how does that compare with constantly moderately elevated, insulin or blood sugar or whatever? Kind of like what you're saying, Phil, like we said for years and years, small, frequent meals.
Yeah.
My gut response to all this, and you guys just heard me say this before we hit record, but homeostasis ruins a lot of these clever strategies. It is interesting, though. I mean, that they're talking about overall mortality, but it's also a good point, Phil. It's not just when, but what.
Yeah.
What are you eating?
Yeah, I think it's just time. Intermittent fasting has had, a 10-year run. So when you start the run, it's the miracle cure. By the end of it, you're going to die from it. So I think we're just at the end of the intermittent fasting run. But also, I think part of it, too, is sometimes it just kind of acknowledges an unhealthy lifestyle. Not saying it specifically with this study, but like people who have longer windows of not eating. Think of people who do almost like, I don't know, like shift work, or just like naturally in their day-to-day life cycle, just sit down and eat a huge meal all at once or whatever. So, I mean, some of it just is like how you've already set up your life in general, which is unhealthy in the first place.
Mm-hmm. No, it just brings me back to, I don't even remember what year it was written, but I remember reading the book years ago, The Warrior Diet. And like,
oh yeah,
what was that, Ori? Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
like, the premise of that was reaching, like, you'd eat sometimes during the day at the beginning, but the premise of it was to reach a point where you ate once a day. And he did that crazy deal where you can have whatever the fuck you want, but you have to eat a whole head of iceberg lettuce first.
Yeah.
That was, you eat a
There's
whole
some
head of
weird
iceberg
stuff in
lettuce,
there.
and then you can have whatever you want after that. It's like, well, yeah, of course, because I got a whole head of fucking lettuce in me.
Right.
So there's only so much room. I mean, that's pretty much, a head of lettuce is like taking paper and grinding it up with water. There's nothing in there for you but just fiber. So
Your new diet, Phil, the lettuce diet. You can eat
Yeah.
whatever you want at any meal, just a head of lettuce beforehand.
as long, yep. As long as you have a head of lettuce 3 times a day, you'll be shitting like crazy.
I think I might do that with a chicken breast. I don't know about iceberg lettuce.
Yeah. But
Mike, what do you think? I mean, people did kind of evolve. You think hunter-gatherer for the vast majority of evolution and all that. This almost smells like the paleo, logic in a way. But people didn't constantly eat.
Good.
No.
So, what do you think?
I mean, my bias is obviously metabolic flexibility, where we had periods of time of, higher carbohydrates, higher insulin, but it was, not all the time, and you were moving. And then we had periods of time where, you don't have too many tubers left, and the woolly mammoth hasn't strolled by your cave yet for a while, so you want to go for 1 or 2 days with not a lot of food. But at the same time, if I'm sure Paleolithic man found a bunch of honey, he's not going to pass up honey and go, ooh, carbohydrates, these are bad. Going to eat as many as possible. So it's, can you do periods of time without a lot of food, so you can downregulate, use fat as a fuel? Can you handle carbohydrates when they're present? And unfortunately, our modern society is like the inverse. We don't do a lot of movement. Our sleep's horrible. We're surrounded by, I used to do this example when I teach, like you're surrounded by carbohydrates. Like even teaching at night, I had to teach a 3-hour class on nutrition once for a while. I'd be like, all right, here's $5. Like, who can come back with the highest amount of calories? And it was amazing. Like, you could find vending machines, you could find all sorts of stuff, like, really easy. So that's my bias. And with this study, like, I think I just looked at it super briefly, so don't quote me on this. But as you know, Lonnie and you guys, that anytime there's a percentage that's like, uh-oh, That's like red flag number one for me. And I think the actual risk was something minuscule. Like there was a change, but it was not anything that I would be super worried about. I'd have to look up to see actually what it was. And then the last point is, I'm pretty sure the 16.8 came about from more practicality, not really anything based on science for originally. As far as I can trace it back, and again, I could be wrong, so somebody let me know if I am. It was from Sachin Panda's lab, and the rationale was that if we do a feeding window for 8 hours, then we'll have like an hour or hour and a half of prep before and after. So grad students would be in the lab then for 10 to 11 hours, and that's about the longest we can really have them in the lab without everybody getting super pissed off at us. So that translated into like an 8-hour feeding window, more or less, just because of practicality of what they could do.
You mean like feasibility in the lab itself? Like we can do a study in this way?
Yeah, feasibility of running the actual study, not, we
Right.
saw this mechanism or we saw this thing, and 8 hours looks like it's the time. And then, in science, it's like, someone published on this. We should check this out and that out. And then it continues, which is great because you have more information. But if you're going to do a new study and use 20 hours and 4 hours, then it's like, well, where's your previous literature on this? Like, it's all on the 16 and 8, so that it gets harder to do new things than on their own.
Yeah, the politics, one of the things that I've gotten jaded over the years is, as somebody who's trained in science, is just that, Sagan called it, the primate dominance hierarchy. We're always eager, whether it's an online influencer or even in real science. Yeah, if a lab comes out and says something, it's a highly respected lab, people just fall over themselves to praise it. And, Jarrell was kind of touching on this earlier. Things start out great. Some of the big labs on intermittent fasting looks great. Logical, right? Is it physiological? I don't know. We'll have to get some data. And then, after years go by and some of the glamour wears off, people are more willing to do something like this one, which is, oh my God, death rates are actually worse. And it depends on the claim, right? And again, this is the thing, the general public, they want to broadly conclude things. And science isn't like that. It's very reductionist. So what's the comparison? Compared to what? It sounds like teaching a research design class, but that's one things we try to introduce undergrads to. Again, like Sagan, give them the tools to think straight. Look at the world like a comparison. So look, to Mike's point, is it like 24 that model versus an 18.6 or whatever it is? What is your very specific comparison? I don't know. What do you think, Phil? I mean, when you read that, are you like, my God, these numbers are really high, this looks bad? Or,
like you said, I think the number one thing is that I saw is like 91% compared to what? Because it never says.
Risk, not the percentage of risk change.
Yes.
Like, what's your actual risk change?
Yeah, well, like if there was 2,000 whatever people and like
dying like flies.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but let's say like 2,081 people, like 4 more died. It's like, really?
Right.
You think that's from the fucking diet? Maybe just 4 more died.
Yeah.
So is it really significant? So compared to what? Because I know plenty of people that are like super healthy and just fucking died. So, and I'm not going to tell you, like Jim Fix, like he died. I'm not going to tell you he died of fucking jogging just because he died jogging.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
when it's all cause mortality, it makes you wonder, like, and
I
know there was some
causation thing. It's like, you really think it's that? I don't know, man. You got no proof to tell me it is. Could be any number of other things. Were these people also smokers? Like the people that ate less, maybe the other 16 hours a day they were cramming down cigarettes to keep them from being hungry. I don't know this.
Exercise.
Yeah.
I mean, because when I hear all cause mortality for that, like if I ate in an extremely restricted window all the time, I would think suicide might be in the calculation.
It's 8 a.m. and I'm hungry as fuck, but I can't eat.
You're right.
So
Yeah.
It's tough for me now. I like reading the stuff, but I've learned to take everything with a grain of salt and then look for more. Okay, well, show me another study. Like, you can't change your whole, like, if you're an intermittent fasting person and you see this, my suggestion is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater over one study. Now, if we get numerous, that like somebody takes this further and does a better study, and you get 4 or 5, okay, now we got something to talk about. You know?
Exactly.
But you can find, like, I can find you articles that say water kills you. You know,
Right.
I mean, don't drink water. So
Yeah, cherry picking is a problem, right? You don't cherry
yes.
pick the literature. You have to look at the totality of the literature. Otherwise, yeah, we could find stuff that creatine was bad for you and you know all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, so I mean that's where I'm at, but I mean I don't know, as far as eating goes, I mean it's interesting, and I automatically do more, I guess you'd call it intermittent fasting, when I'm not gaining weight from meat. But that's because basically I'm doing the polar opposite. Like, I get tired of fucking eating.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, man, it's nice to be hungry again. And like right now, I've leaned towards, like, I don't eat till about noon. And it's just, I might have a little snack or something, but I'm just not hungry first thing in the morning anymore. And I eat now when I'm hungry. It's a novel thing, but I suggest more people try it. It's a good way to curb your intake. Like, not
You
hungry,
know,
don't eat. Hungry,
right?
eat.
Yeah.
So,
Or on related, I guess I was talking to my buddy Steve recently, and he dropped a bunch of weight. He's a former competitive bodybuilder, and he's like, I had to be a little bit okay with being hungry. Like, he's on it like an 1,800 calorie diet, and he's a big boy. So I mean, that's not a lot of food. It's not ridiculous. It's not fasting, but I can see how when you're used to shoveling down, 3 cups of vegetables and 2 chicken breasts or a steak or whatever it is you're doing, and a couple cups of rice, whatever, and then you're eating 1,800 calories a day. So I do think I like the idea that you should be okay with being hungry every once in a while and not going panic mode. Because I've been on both sides of that spectrum. I haven't been as big as you have, Phil, but I've bloated up to 230, and I've shrunk down by dropping 40 of those pounds to compete.
Yeah.
And so it's you get tired of eating too much. You get tired of eating too little. It really comes down to like what people can live with, I think. But yeah, I tend to think at my age now that I'm old that having like a Chris Sugar kind of protein pulse Friday where I'm mostly fasting, a little bit of protein trickling in, I should probably get back to that a little bit because I'm like 212 now, and I really should be down around 200 at my height. I mean, I'm only 5'9". So yeah, in that way, I can see that. And Mike, you and I, we've been to conferences. We've seen people give data about how certain genes come on or growth factors. I mean, I've seen some pretty interesting evidence that fasting, learning to be a little hungry and fasting, it's a good thing. My overall impression of many conferences, like I said, everything from genetics to hormones and chronobiology, it sounds like, yeah, probably an overall pretty good idea to let yourself be hungry, even psychologically. You can be hungry a little bit on Fridays or every other Friday or whatever, get out from under this constant insulin burden. I once wrote an article about that. Probably a good idea. But
Yeah, I mean that's my bias. I mean, that's what I teach in the Flex Diet Cert. Actually, fasting's a number 2 intervention, which kind of surprised me because when I tried doing it years ago, I didn't think that would be the case. And similar to you, Lonnie, I was just looking for a stimulus that wasn't exercise that could drop insulin, potentially re-regulate glucose, upregulation of fatty acids, use fat for fuel. And then it was also just an easy way for people to cut a lot of calories out of their week too.
Yeah.
So I generally have them work up to, I got this from Brad Pilon from Eat Stop Eat back in the day, like 1 day per week, slowly work up to a 19 to 24 hour fast. Obviously this would be if your goal is, more body comp related.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the week you can eat pretty normal and still make pretty good progress, which is what I thought I liked. And so for some clients, I'll even be like, hey, here's your option. We can do this. This day is going to be a little bit harder, but it's not going to be as hard as what you think if you go into it properly and you're hydrated and have electrolytes, etc. And then you can be a little bit more moderate the rest of the week, or you can be a little bit more strict most of the time the rest of the week. And surprisingly, most people do the fasting option and like it better.
I can see that. You know, it's the more extreme choice. It's like rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, rip the Band-Aid
one day
off.
a week. One day a week. I'm
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
My only concern, and when I did this myself, because last time I competed, I did this with the Fridays, just, you know, and I'm not talking about 40 grams of protein in a pop. I'm just talking about little half scoop of protein like every 4 hours, just because I was worried about muscle loss and stuff. But, and maybe irrationally so, but that's just, you know, my mindset, I guess.
I mean, you can use like essential amino acids. You know, I'll have some people do that, you know, 6 to 12 grams of essential amino acids twice.
Yep.
And then recently, based on the John Formalin study, what I've done is modify it where in the morning you'll eat 100 grams of protein and then that's it. So like, let's say your dinner was 8 p.m. You'll have breakfast, it's 100 grams of protein, and then you would have your normal dinner at 8 p.m. So you have one huge spike of protein in the morning, based on that study, as we talked about, should last about 12 hours. And then, because what I also realized was hard is, like you, Lonnie, I do think the protein feeding during the day may be helpful. But the biggest thing I ran into with myself and clients was even just eating protein, like they got hungrier and it was much harder for them to kind of stop eating. Or if they just didn't eat, it was actually easier, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah.
From a psychology standpoint.
Yeah. I remember the Biotest people, they sold a giant jug and it was literally like, I don't know, 3 liters. It was enormous.
Yeah.
It was metered on the side. It was measure, and I would fill it up with very dilute, and I would slam. Basically, I just filled it up with whey protein and a little bit of leucine, which normally I would never add to a whey or casein, but I'm having so little. I just wanted to spike with a little leucine, you know, so you end up with 3 grams of leucine and like 10 grams of protein, whatever. And then I would just sip on that. So I just drank it. There was no food at all. Just drank that instead of basically water. And to your point, Mike, I don't know if that made me hungrier or not. Maybe I would have been better by just doing nothing at all. I mean, you got to hydrate, I would think. But
and I played with that with clients, and I found that anecdotal. If it's a beverage like that, and they were just sipping it, and it wasn't a bolus or meal, it didn't seem to affect them either way. But if they sat down to eat like a full meal, even if it was just like, hey, just have some protein and veggies, it was much harder to turn that off when they were hungry. It was easier for them to just be like, okay, distract yourself, you know, drink some fluid, have some more electrolytes, and then, you know, go with your normal time.
Like
which is interesting, yeah.
We watch those like survival shows where people are like starving out in the wilderness and they have to last like 40 days.
Oh, yeah.
And they haven't eaten in like 4 days, and one of them catches a minnow.
Right.
2 grams of protein. They eat that, and they're like, fuck, now I'm just more hungry.
Yeah.
You know, I had a taste of
food.
food.
That.
I found a cricket.
No, I mean, I have days where I'm a stressed not eater. Always have been. And like I'll be busy at work, and I'll just forget to eat all day. And there's a point you hit where it's like the hunger just goes away.
Yeah. It comes in waves.
And it's like, oh, okay, I'm good. I can just keep going. You know?
Yeah. I always had a problem in the evenings, like even when I did that pulse fasting, and up to the point where I'm like, all right, I am really freaking hungry at 7 p.m. And I thought, well, kind of halfway to solid food. I'm going to kind of, at least in my mind, stick to this concept. And I would just have some like egg beaters or egg whites, just not a huge amount, but something to put in my pie hole because I was freaking out because satiety is so poor in the evening, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And which brings me to my last point about this, which is after the fast, I am a huge fan after watching a lot of and just reading a lot of stuff, but lectures and textbooks that your body is such storage mode that I think the idea that, well, if you just eat in this window, then you fast for a long time, then eat whatever you want. I don't think I would do that. I mean, as a physiologist, and I haven't seen data on this, but I don't think I would come back and start the next morning with a whole chocolate cake and gallon of milk. You know what I mean? I think I would try to, no, Lonnie, just eat a normal, pump the brakes and try to get back eating normally. So you're actually ahead, calorie wise or deficit wise or whatever. I know people say even if ad libitum, you probably won't put back all those missing calories, but I still, based on like metabolism and nutrient storage and all that, I think I would be careful, on the rebound from coming from fasting after fasting.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I have clients do in the flex diet cert too, is that their first meal, normally they'll fast from evening to evening just because of the social thing, being with their family and, everything else. It just makes it easier logistically. And I'll have them write down, okay, what was your meal? You're going to have a huge amount of protein first. You'll have some veggies. You don't necessarily have to eat a head of lettuce, but, have that first. And then we'll monitor, like, if your meal in the evening is just batshit crazy and you fall into 2 birthday cakes, then we're going to shorten your fasting window and look at doing some other stuff for a while to kind of get you into that position.
Because you can't handle it.
Yeah, you just,
It's
like, but then you just pushed it too far, so like you should just have a normal-ish meal, relax, and you should be okay with that. Pretend like the fast just never happened and you're back on your normal schedule the next day.
Yeah. A lot of that comes in time though. And that's no different than like the anabolic diet where you go a couple weeks of nothing but low carb and then he starts giving you refeed days. Like those people's first refeeds are just bullshit.
Crazy.
It's all bullshit food. But then after a certain amount of time, you realize, I get this once a week. And they get more sane.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of where you have to lean to. And he's like, luckily he recognizes that in the book and he realizes that like you're going to go nuts the first few times. And the point is eventually get a bit more tame with it. But let's be honest. I mean, intermittent fasting, like low carb, high carb. And when you break it down, like pretty much 100% of diets are calorie restriction in some way.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. It's just different ways to skin the cat.
Physics still works.
Right.
Yeah. Physics is real. It's thermogenesis. All of it is at the end of the day. It's just like, are you restricting a macronutrient? Are you restricting time? Are you like all of them get to the same end.
Yeah.
So it's just finding what works for you. And that's like, I don't know why, but what works for me is like, I just go fairly low carb all week long. And then on the weekends, I get whatever the fuck I want and I don't go crazy, all week long, I just eat meat and vegetables and the occasional fruit. And then on my weekends with the family, I can just, let's have some chips and salsa, whatever, And I can live that way happily.
It's a good rule, like that old Phil rule: eat like an adult. Just eat like an adult.
Now there are some people. I've ran into some people. Like I have one of my clients right now. He's like, "Eat like an adult." What do you mean? This is how I ate my whole life.
Yeah.
This is what the adults in my family taught me to eat.
Right.
So
maybe
that can be depending, but
like a mature adult, or eat like an adult that was born before 2000.
Yeah. And
where we had like family dinners where like a lean meat, some kind of vegetable or for color, and a starch.
Yeah.
There it is. That's what I mean. A lean protein source, some colorful vegetable, and a starch: rice, potatoes, pasta, whatever. That's what I mean. And eat whole foods like that.
Totally kind of off original topic, but one thing that's always fascinated me would be if to try, or if they could put a study together. I would love to see somebody like try a seasonal diet, like meaning like years ago in the Ooga Booga caveman days, like they ate what was available. So like in the fall, you'd have fruits and vegetables and stuff, would be abundant comparison to the rest of the year. And it'd be like it'd be neat to see what a seasonal diet did. You would constantly be varied just because of that, which we always talk about. Like you talk about it all the time. Buy something new at the store every time you go. Like your whole year would be different. There'd be times in the winter where you're low carb by necessity,
Right.
Because there are no vegetables and fruits. Like all there is that elk And then come spring, the lettuces start growing and, berries, and that'd be an interesting thing. Like, are we really more built for that? Like, you would think.
Right.
After millions of years of freaking evolution, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, because I can tell you, I don't know what Kansas or I have some indication of what Minnesota's like, but here in Ohio, like fall, apples galore. Like we would be eating lots of apples.
Well, if you look at it, though, and it makes sense. Look at every other animal in the world. Look at bears. Like, what do they do? What happens right before winter? They fucking get fat because they need to last the long fast. And I would think people did that. Like, oh shit, winter's coming. All this food's here. We need to eat as much as we can because we're going to have months of lean times. So
yeah, we tend to think within in the sports industries, I guess, sports nutrition, we tend to think weekly, like fast during the week or no carbs, then bulk up or, carb up on weekends. We tend to think daily or weekly, not like a giant macro cycle. Like we do training, lifting like that, but not so much eating.
Or like even people want to always be at a certain scale weight year round. It's like, it's okay to vary some.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay to go up 10 pounds and then down 10 pounds. And like, people get married to the scale in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
So
it sounds more like Mike, like flexibility, and you need some variation to be healthy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and to that idea, my buddy Thaddeus Owen wrote a book actually on that idea, and I feel bad because I didn't like it on the title of it, but if you probably look up Primal Hacker Thaddeus, it'll show up.
Okay.
And there is some research on that. You can look up the metabolic winter hypothesis from Ray Cronise and some other guys. And that's exactly their argument, that in the past, it's kind of like we talked about. You've got periods of calories higher, calories lower. The amount of foods, the things you get are variable. So you have this forced seasonality variability. And now we don't have any of that, right? So we pulled all the variability out of it. And their argument, which I would tend to agree with, is that's to our detriment, right? And if you look at creeping obesity, how much people gain just a small amount each year, but it's consistent over every year. People don't move as much. There's no variation between periods where they're trying to gain weight or periods where they're trying to lose weight. It's just this slow inching upward all the time.
Yeah, because, it makes sense. Like, we are always in a state of abundance now. This perpetual fall time.
Yeah. The
And
perpetual bears getting ready for hibernation.
Yes, yeah. And that makes sense where, like, type 2 diabetes comes from. Like, if there was perpetual, if your overfeeding window was 8 weeks a year, you're not going to do permanent damage.
No.
If it's 30 years of perpetual feeding, we got issues, and also hopefully, as long as you're doing it right back in the day, like, you would need to eat enough to make it through winter. But about the time you start, like, any abundance or restriction is going to have negatives in the long term. Like, if you undereat too long, bad shit's going to happen. Overeat too long, bad shit's going to happen. Hopefully, about the time bad shit's going to happen, food arrives again. Right before death, the ice thaws and I can catch fish.
Right. A lot of the problems you hear out of people now, and I know we need to go to break here, but is I can't stop eating. Well, put them back a couple hundred years. Guess what? You're going to stop eating because there's no frickin' food.
Because you had no choice. Yeah, I hate that. I hate, like, people that give power to food like that. It's like, you really, that ho-ho has more power than you. That fucking thing's stronger than you. Put it down. I hate that argument. It's like, come on, man. You are a mental midget if you, like, have to eat that.
Yeah. I would think behaviorally they just need to get practice, like reps. It's just like the growth mindset in the gym, like if you're so mentally weak that the ho-ho is beating you in an arm wrestling match, so to speak, metaphorically, then build up your ability to fight back against the ho-ho by just whatever it is. Probably work with if you have to, work with a counselor. That's kind of a plug from what my wife does, but that's what they talk about in CBT. It's just a lot of just cognitive restructuring. It's just working on coping skills, find ones that work for you so you don't keep getting your ass kicked by the ho-ho. because you're right. That's a sad state of being right there.
Yeah, and
You
same.
literally can't put down the ho-ho.
It's just like I hate the word cheat meal and things like that. No, you're making a fucking choice. You're eating that shit. Like it's not a cheat meal. Just accept it and move the fuck on. I decide to eat cake. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you put it down and move on again.
Yeah. That's the argument why I do like fasting, because once people are successful for that for a period of time, then you transfer that skill to try to be more moderate at other times.
Yes.
You're like, hey, remember Tuesday? Like you didn't eat for 20 hours. How did you feel? It's like, I was a little bit hungry, but everything was fine. Cool. All right. So you're not going to die if you're a little bit hungry.
Yes.
And if you eat one less cookie at the next meal, that's going to be okay. Like you'll be fine.
Yep.
Yep. Oh yeah, I did it. Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's habits, building habits.
Little self-reflection like that.
Yep. So,
okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I've got a couple of things that we can put off till next week. I was just painting through the recent Food Technology magazine. If anybody is interested, we're going to talk about the cost of cultured meat coming down. We're going to talk about functional food beverages, including stuff for brain fog, which is a bigger problem these days, like post-COVID and stuff. But let's go to break, and we come back. We're going to talk about what was it, Phil, about getting started in a sense?
Yeah, just what we would suggest for people getting started in the field.
Sounds good. Hey, everybody. Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
All right, everybody, we're back. And this just came up. I was just reading an article. I think it was the strength coach at Boston College. And it was just a bunch of questions to him. And one of the questions that the interviewer gave him was, for people that are inspiring to get into the field as strength coaches, what advice would you give them? And I thought it'd be something neat that we hit up, especially with how the times have changed as far as the advent of social media and things like that. And just where we would head that way. And like my answers haven't changed due to social media. That's because most of the people that are getting into the field, I feel, are they're doing it wrong. Like, is there a way to get into it and be successful? Yes, but today's measures of success to me has nothing to do with their ability as a coach, and more with their ability as an Instagram personality. So I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on what would be your number one thing to tell people to do when they're getting into the field or wanting to enter the field potentially?
Like the field of actually coaching, or the field of science?
Yeah, just being a strength coach or science. Me and you, I guess we would more lean towards the strength coach thing. Lonnie, I guess more the nutrition end of the thing. I mean, that way we can cover.
Personally, I would say you gotta actually get your hands dirty and ideally in a situation where you can be underneath someone else and working with people. You should have a basic understanding of, I don't want to say specifically biomechanics and stuff like that, but you need a discipline. You need to be have a discipline and a practice in strength and conditioning. No matter what that is, preferably you have a coach, and then you a coach who actually teaches you what's going on, what you need to read, and then gives you some, you should have to train the bad clients for a while, honestly. You need to train the people who I don't want to say bad clients, but I mean, I don't have another name for it, but
less skilled.
The clients less skilled, or even the ones with because you need to understand who you're working with, what it's like working with the public people. And then from there, like, you have to develop your own philosophy and strategy. And now on top of that, you gotta, as you're going, like posting that and creating it as content and putting it out there. So you gotta be a video editor, writer, trainer. You gotta do it all for a little while.
Yeah. No, and that's one of the big things he goes into, and it was a very mature answer on my end. Is like he starts it off with like, "There's a reason you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. Shut the one mouth and open your eyes and ears for a while." And like my big thing has always been like learn, shut up, listen, and watch from as many varied sources as you can. Like one of my pet peeves is when people became like. And it's not so prevalent now, or I've just fallen out of watching the industry. Like the big thing for a while was for people to become like a Checky, or like they'd find one person and latch onto them. Or you had all the Polican people, and like these people would latch on to one specific coach, and that's who they'd learn from. And what happened is they all became poor carbon copies of the original. And instead, what you see is normally when people pull from varied sources, like spend a few months over here, spend a few months over there, learn from that, read this book, read that book. Then they come to their own conclusions and become themselves. And that's what I would urge people to do. Like, don't become a poor carbon copy of one coach. Learn as much as you can from varied sources and keep and throw out what doesn't work for you. Over time. And the problem with that is I think it takes longer. But I think you reach a better place. If that makes sense at all. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. The only caveat I would add is, which sounds like a disagreement, but it isn't. I would say pick a time period to learn from said person or said system. And your only time during that period is to do that system only and get as good as you possibly can within it, and then move to the next one.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
Which I know is what you're saying, but we see people who...
No, that makes sense.
Did a weekend cert, and now they're an expert in Bosu balls, and now weekend cert, they're an expert in kettlebells, and, it's like...
Oh, yeah. Or you get the people that do, like, I did 6 weeks of conjugate. It sucks. Nobody should ever do it. Dude, you did it for fucking 6 weeks. You have no clue.
Yeah. But I think just picking a solid system and then learning that as best you can. And again, that system has to match your needs. If your job is to work with geared power lifters and open meets, that's going to be different from training D1 or whatever level college athletes who are not using stuff. Those are worlds apart. So pick someone in that system that it matches what you want to do in the end.
Yeah. I'd say one of the biggest mistakes I see right now is that everyone gets like kind of caught up with the idea of like just like the online coaching.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think personally I would say you should not be able to, like, there's no law against it, but you should not start with that. Like, you should start training people and like being able to see them train and how it goes. Like, you have to understand like like basically how they interpret what you say, and not have, where it's like a week later, a day later, or whatever. Like, you have to, I would say, start in person, like hands down, start in person and get some hours in. Now, after a while, like maybe, I don't know, maybe a year, as long as you're doing the grunt work, after a year, maybe you can start opening up and like trying some new stuff online, but I wouldn't start online.
No, that's my recommendation too, which I get a lot of hate mail because they're like, "Weren't you the guy that does an online certification?" I'm like, "Yeah, basically for nutrition, but I started working in a gym, was training clients in person at the local Globo gym for a while till they filed bankruptcy. Did I like it? No. Did I realize I want to do that the rest of my life? Hell no. Am I super thankful I started there? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The amount of reps you get with people who are less skilled, like you have to be good to stay in business. And so that then, like you said, Darrell, translates to online, where you have this library of experience you can pull from and cues to help people. Right? If you're nowadays, everybody just wants to be an online trainer, and they get okay at programming, but they can't do anything else beyond that. They don't know the cues and the ways people can screw stuff up and what works better and what doesn't work better. And I just think you get that by having at least some practice of in-person training.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, there's those are the dues that have to be paid, that are largely getting ignored now, and it's learning. Like, everybody's an individual.
Oh yeah.
And well, also, it's not just cues; it's varied cues. Like, you
can't use the same ones.
You need 10 cues for one thing, because you don't know which is going to work on them. So, and that's that. Online training is infinitely harder than in person.
Yes.
Because you don't have that direct feedback. But sadly, it's the first thing people lead to nowadays. It's like Darrell said. I mean, I think that should be step 8. You know? But I understand why they do it, because it's easy. But it's easy to enter that field. But I think it's wrong. But so.
Yeah, maybe it's...
Lonnie, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's generational a little bit. I mean, I started literally in high school and college, undergrad, as a personal trainer. Back in the days where mom and pop gyms, when you signed up, they gave you a sheet, like, go through these 15 different Nautilus machines. And I did that for years. I just took people one to the next. We'd do one set of each thing, and then eventually they might do a second, circuit through there. Now, like Planet Fitness, people just kind of come and go. And, a lot of times it's a much extra thing. Would you hire a trainer? But it was just part of the gym membership. And for years, okay, so these are the machines. These are the movements that do the major muscle groups, to exercise your major muscle groups. And, and what people flaked and why they flaked. Like, I would make observations. Like, every January, the gym is packed. And by Valentine's Day, it's not. And so you start making these behavioral, like accidental learning almost. And then for myself, I'm like, okay, these machines are great, but oh my God, there's an unlimited world of variety with free weights. And oh, look, they work better. I would think whether you're going to go into sports with nutrition specifically, though, if you're going to do it as a practice yourself, or even, well, I don't want to say coach other people. I don't like what I see online about nutrition practice. If you're practicing nutrition in Ohio and you're not licensed, you're a criminal. You're a criminal. And so I grew up in that setting, both not liking it and liking it. It's just a very strange world for me. But I would suggest that a person who wants to at least practice sports nutrition, like, as a daily thing, like when you talk about Stoic philosophy, they wouldn't just talk about it. They would do it in daily practice. Otherwise, you forget what you had learned and you start doing the opposite, But I would say examine why you're interested. What is your interest? Because unless you have some level of intrinsic motivation, I don't think you could just rely on somebody else. I know people will buy a package with a nutrition coach. And again, I cringe to even say that. But when they do that, yes, that person's reminding them and helping with motivation. But why the hell do you want this at all? Like, for me, I know what it was. My friend's parents owned a gym, so I was working in there part-time. That was sort of serendipitous. But I looked at muscle magazines. My oldest sister bought me a Flex magazine in 1983. You guys have heard me say this before. And I started panning through it. And, there's a lot of stuff in there about how those guys eat to look that way. But there was a reason. And I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what I want to do. These guys look like gods. They look, they're heroic. I want to be like that. And even before I understood performance-enhancing drugs and steroids and all the different things that make a lot of those guys on the cover of the magazine look the way they do, it was a huge intrinsic motivator. And I would think, even if you want to be a coach, you got to think that, like, why am I so passionate about this?
Yeah.
What is my motivation? And then have your clients think about that too. Step 2 would be get a textbook. To echo what you guys said, not online, Online's full of shit.
Yeah.
90+% of the time, there's great info online if you know where to look. But you almost have to take a college course just to know where to look, or at least have a list. .edu, .gov. And when I say .gov, I know a lot of people mistrust the government these days, but I mean like the Office of Dietary Supplements, ODS.gov. It's a good place to start. But I like the Mel Williams textbook. You guys know this because it's friendly, but it's also a modern lit review on each topic. You want to know about carb restriction? It's in there. You want to know about, creatine? It's in there. It ramps up into a literature review, so you start getting evidence-based in the way you think. Right. So examine your motivation, whether it's you or a client, and then start getting evidence-based. I like university textbooks. Obviously, it's my bias. I did that for 25 years, but it's also because they help curate it for you. What's not junk, And it's even, you buy an intro level book and then you can go to a higher level book and it's scaffolded so you can get more advanced. I would not start with some online system, and no offense to the people in fitness that do that, but I would start with a textbook like that. And then as far as personal practice goes, you guys know the old tricks that I hold to these after all these years, but pick a protein source. For me, it's like chicken breast, grilled chicken breast, or it could be whey protein, whatever it is, and lean on that. So start supplementing some protein while you're doing your exercise, whatever it is you're doing. Because again, it's sports nutrition. There has to be a sport component. And then the usual, like buy a bag of frozen vegetables and make it disappear every week. That alone, you're going to get protein for your muscles because once you start lifting, you're going to need it. And you're going to get some vegetables in your diet, which otherwise society won't provide. So that would be kind of my off the cuff, how do you get started in sports nutrition, whether it's for yourself or even eventually with clients. I would think you better be able to demonstrate some of this shit on yourself before you start doing it with clients. But what's your interest? Get a textbook and then go try it. Actually go buy some vegetables and lean protein and
you can
try
get
it.
Not the latest up to date or used version, like one version back, which, as you guys know, isn't vastly different, for dirt cheap. Like you can buy used academic textbooks for basically pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And you're not going to find a value that's much greater than that.
It's a good point. Yeah, buy even 2 editions back. And instead of $200, it's going to be $15.
Yeah.
Total worthwhile investments. Because then you're getting a non-bullshit, at least attempt at objectivity, so you can understand the landscape and why, the underlying why, not just how to do it. Because that's what I don't like about a lot of systems is first you do this and then you do that. But you got to know why. What's at work in the human? How does the body work? Because then you can start to call foul when people feed you bullshit online about how aerobic exercise is making everybody fat. What? When you hear crap like that, you can be like, no, that's not right. Anyway.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is if you can find someone to work with directly, which again could be a professor on campus, could be a college course, could be whatever, that you can, I think, shorten your learning curve by being able to ask specific questions and get legitimate answers. And that is one reason why, for now, at least, I still, and anyone who did the Flex Diet Cert who's enrolled can literally has my private email and can ask me any questions. Because I think that's how people learn. It could be on themselves, it could be on their clients or whatever. And so I think that's one way you can shorten it. Is that usually the cheapest route to go? No, it's going to be more expensive, but I think you can get specific knowledge that way too.
Yeah. If you're a college student, it's kind of built into your tuition in a sense, but
Correct.
I agree. Like if I ever gave a graduation speech, I would give Arnold's 6 rules for success and I would add just one more. Get a mentor, right? Find a mentor. That's going to, like you said, vastly shorten the learning process, accelerate the learning, so you're not struggling for 90 minutes every time there's a minor question. You got to get a mentor if you're really serious. Once you examine yourself and you know that you're intrinsically motivated and stuff. But yeah, you don't choose those willy-nilly. You got to be very careful. And I know Phil would probably say more than one mentor. So across time, so you can you get different flavors, but all right. I guess we're out of time.
Cool.
All right, guys. Well, everybody, we'll see you next week.
See you.
See you.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community.
The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.